Hello and welcome to the One Life Church devotional series where we cover the entire Bible in 20 months. Well, today's chapters are Psalm 24 and 25. Now, to understand Psalm 24, we need to understand the context. What's he writing about? What's the occasion? Well, if you look at the last section of this psalm, he repeats a phrase twice, which means it's extremely important. He says, "Lift up your heads, you gates. Lift them up, you ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in." Who is he? This King of glory, the Lord Almighty. He is the King of glory. Now that's repeated twice. So he's basically saying there's a building somewhere. There's a building somewhere in Israel with doors on it. And he's saying to the doors, stand to attention, because someone very important is about to come in. You know, in the olden days and the times of the kings of England, when they wanted to come into London, they would come to the great doors which let them into the city. And then there would be a knocking, there would be a doorkeeper. And they would say, well, who goes there? And they would say, the King of England. And then the soldiers and the royal army would open the door and the King of England would come in. That's the sort of grand gesture that's being applied here. So let me ask the question, where in David's time did such a thing happen? Well, in 1 Chronicles 15 and in 2 Samuel chapter 6, you will see that David in Jerusalem, when he finished building his palace, pitched a massive tent. He built a building, a temporary structure, because his son was going to build a permanent one, and had this incredible ceremony of bringing the ark, the presence of God, the glory of God. And you can read those chapters to see. I mean, it was preceded with singing and dancing, and even David himself was dancing like that. And God's presence, his glory, comes into the building. So now, if we have a look at the psalm in that context, if that's what David's writing about, he says the earth is the Lord's. Actually, he's everywhere. But who may ascend the mountain of the Lord, the special place, and stand in his holy place? He's basically saying, who can stand there in his holy place? He says, look, let me give you the answer to that. It's someone with clean hands and a pure heart. And so that's why all the sacrifices were necessary. You see, God had promised a blessing over Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So in fact, he says here, he says, such a generation of those who will seek him, who seek the face of the God of Jacob. Luke, our friend, asked the question, why does he call him the God of Jacob? Well, God had promised over Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, you're going to have this blessing, and the blessing will be, you'll know God, he will be your God, and he will bring blessing to you and your children, and in fact the whole world will be blessed through you. And so basically he's saying in this grand psalm that the God of Jacob came into our tent, came into this tabernacle we built, and we get to, because of the sacrifices that he's made, we get to be in his presence. And so in one sense, the glory of God came into this tent in Jerusalem. In addition to that, the glory of God, when we see this happening, it's Jesus ascended, coming into heaven, opening up the way so that we can come into his presence. And then now, in a very real sense, and you can read it in Revelation 3, every time we open our heart, it's like the glory of God coming in. Basically, he stands at the door and knocks, like the king standing at the door of your heart. And he's knocking at your heart. And you might say, well, who goes there? And this is the King of glory. Open up, stand to attention, and allow him in. This is a beautiful psalm describing what happened in Jerusalem and what happens in your heart when you accept Jesus into your heart. Now, Psalm 25 is what they call an acrostic psalm, which means that every line starts with the following letter of the Jewish alphabet. So in that sense, it's a little bit higgledy-piggledy in terms of its themes, but you've got to ask yourself the question, well, why was he writing it? It seems to me that David was working through a problem here, and it looks like that he sinned, and how do you address God after you've sinned? And so you'll see this. He says, in you, Lord, I put my trust. He says, you go to God. You don't run away once you've sinned. And then he says, show me your ways. Show me your ways. I've messed up properly. Show me your ways, he says in verse 4. And then from verse 7 onwards, he's basically asking for forgiveness and for shame to be taken from him. Do not remember the sins of my youth, he says, verse 11. For the sake of your name, please forgive my iniquity, he says in verse 11, though it is great. And then he says in verse 14, the Lord confides in those who fear him. He makes his covenant known to me. He says, I know there's a covenant that says I can come into your presence. My eyes are ever on the Lord, for only he will release my feet from the snares. Luke asked the question, what snares that I think is the snares of sin? And turn to me and be gracious. Then he ends the psalm by saying, Lord, be kind to me. I'm coming to you. I'm asking you for mercy. I've messed up.